the small businesses. The total amounts distributed to these 21 businesses represents $2,795,779 to these 21 businesses. And the minority business total is 10 businesses for a total of $360,034. So that's the table on the left, and the table on the right represents the future commitments, which matches the previous slide's number of 1.15 million. So these future commitments represent commitments made in the past that continue beyond the current fiscal year, as well as future commitments that we intend to make.
Mr. Park, I don't want to. Just wanted to clear something up. So,
Sure.
there's no key, but is there a trick to the color code? What is blue? What does blue represent? What does yellow represent?
Sure, no problem. The blue represents businesses that are minority owned, and the yellow represents businesses that are considered small business.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the white ones are just the regular businesses.
Just non-
Chemours,
Right.
Navient. Okay.
Correct. And so you'll see that the $1.15 million future contractual commitment matches the previous spreadsheet and is the impetus for why we stand in front of you today, requesting another infusion because these contractual commitments put us at a deficit going forward with our current balance. So if you'll move on to the next slide.
And I want to recognize Councilmember Fields is on as well. Thank you very much for joining us.
I have a question on this.
Excuse me, I had a question.
So let me see. I need to get my screen back up. All right, now the way we would like to do this, let's hold the questions until we get through the slides, and then we'll have OED answer the questions. Okay. So I see everyone. We have everyone down in the order, but we'll wait till he finishes his pretty brief presentation.
Correct.
We'll let you continue, Mr. Park, a few more minutes, and then we can go into the questioning. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this slide represents a brief summary of the infusions to date to the strategic fund. The fund started in 2002. There's been 6 funding rounds since that time, which total $16.33 million. And today we are proposing a $1.2 million infusion with a $250,000 set aside, up to $250,000 set aside. And if you'll go to the next slide here, I do want to reiterate Director Flynn's point that additional wage tax revenue from strategic fund agreements go directly into the general fund. And our office closely tracks the roughly 70 or so companies that we have a strategic fund agreement with. And here we have assembled the wage tax revenue through the lifetime of the strategic fund. In 2020, we generated roughly $10.18 million in additional wage tax revenue. And you'll see the total from 2002 through 2019, bringing the total to $117 million. So the return on investment on this could be thought of as every dollar spent from our strategic fund brings back $7.2 into the general fund. This is a roughly 640% return. Next slide, you'll see this data represented visually, which shows the cumulative effect over time of these ongoing wage tax revenue agreements. And next slide, we'll briefly go over the purpose of the strategic fund. As previously mentioned, it was started in 2002 to be a tool that provides financial incentives to businesses. Our office takes an analytical approach to structuring incentive agreements, and so we model out the number of new full-time jobs and expected wage tax revenue. And if businesses don't meet these requirements, then there's clawbacks contained within the agreement whereby a business should pay back the city if they don't meet these requirements. And we'll go on to the next slide. Next, I'll pass it on to James Williams, my colleague at the Office of Economic Development.
All right. Thank you, Sean. Good evening, Committee Chair Johnson and council members and
Good evening.
guests. As Deputy Director Sean already stated, my name is James Williams, and I am the new Small and Minority Business Development Manager. I began working here in the Office of Economic Development at the end of June of this year, and I'm really excited to be here with you all today. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the small businesses this office has provided assistance to since my arrival. Of the 21 businesses listed on our list, which Sean kindly presented earlier, 10 of those businesses are minority-owned businesses, and I've had the pleasure of working with 4 of those pretty early on with my time here with the city. I've come to know these business owners fairly well, and I'm proud to say that our office was able to assist the owners with strategic fund support in order to encourage their growth in various ways. I've included 4 testimonials from the aforementioned businesses that I've had the pleasure of working with. I won't read through all of them. You can see them for yourself. But I will say that the first one that we have here on the list is a business called Eat Clean Juice Bar, which is located right down on 225 North Market Street. Our office was able to provide some strategic fund support to help them invest in a marketing campaign as well as a pasteurization study. The marketing campaign was aimed at bringing awareness to the benefits of eating healthy, fresh produce and vegetables, as well as highlighting some of their menu items in the neighborhood around their store. Additionally, some of the funds were used to help with a pasteurization study, as I mentioned, which will help them to sell their juice in outside locations. It'll help establish a shelf life for the products that they make there at the shop on Market Street. Next slide, please. Next, I'd like to talk a little bit about James and Jesse's Barber Shop, which was a referral made by Councilperson Oliver.
Actually, Mr. Williams, I don't mean to, stop your presentation, but actually, I've realized you're new in a very important key position. Can you give a brief, just let council know who you are? I know some of my colleagues know you, just your brief background, coming from wherever you came from, just so everyone feels comfortable, because I know you're going to be a key person. They were used to dealing with Treasurer Dwayne Sims, so I just, can you give a brief background and then go back into your
Absolutely,
presentation?
no problem at all. So I guess to start, I spent the past 14 years working for a local, large global financial institution as a project manager and business analyst, working with data, working with numbers, as well as working with small, actually businesses of all sizes, from small to medium-sized enterprises all the way up through your large global conglomerate corporates and financial institutions. As I mentioned, I began working here with the city of Wilmington back at the end of June, I believe it was June 28th, into the role that was formerly held by Treasurer Dwayne Sims. So I, again, spent 14 years working in financial services, making the transition here to working in city government.
All right. Well, thank you and welcome. Welcome. I know this is your first finance meeting. We appreciate you being here. Okay, jumping back into James and Jesse shop.
All right, so James and Jesse's Barbershop, again, was a referral that was made by Councilwoman Oliver. They're located on the east side over on Bennett Street, which I had the pleasure of visiting and providing some assistance to them. They had reached out for some assistance to install air conditioning in their shop. They had an issue that caused their former air conditioning to be uninstalled, basically. So it's a long-serving shop over on the east side. I believe they've been around since 1972. The next slide, please. Next, we have a business called the Produce Spot, which is located at 2400 Northeast Boulevard. It's a up-and-coming small produce market. We provided some support to them, which helped them purchase a lit sign for the front of their building, which you'll see in the picture there, which replaced just a basic, two-dimensional sign that they had up at the time. But it also helped them to finance some additional refrigeration units which will help to extend the shelf life of their produce that they have in the store and also to expand their inventory. Next slide, please. Lastly, we were able to provide a support grant to a child care center called Precious Little Hands, which is located over on 111 South Lincoln Street. Our support was able to help them as they expanded into this new site. This is the second of their 2 sites here in the city of Wilmington, where they intend to be able to provide services to up to 55 children, I believe. And they're getting close to that now. But our support was able to help them with additional improvements to the interior and to repair a hole that they actually had at the site that they moved into in the roof. So they were very appreciative of the support that the city was able to provide. So as you can see from our history of providing support to the city's small business community throughout the city, we were able to put these funds to good use in ways that the business owners, themselves see fit, and they've, come to us for support about. I've really enjoyed meeting the business owners and working with them to solve these unique business challenges. And I asked it, as council members, that you continue to refer, small businesses in your districts to our office so that we can support in any ways that we can. All right, so
Okay.
now I'll
And
pass the ball back
Mr.
to.
Williams, do you have your contact info, email for everyone who does not have it?
Absolutely. What's the best way to provide that? Just.
Yeah, just say it, yeah.
All right.
Everyone's
so-
watching.
No worries. So you can reach me at my email, which is JC as in cats, Williams at wilmingtondE.gov.
Okay. And so any member of the public or member of council can reach out to you if there's a business in their district that needs help?
Absolutely.
Okay, all right. All right, well, I appreciate it, Mr. Williams. Thank you very much for the presentation. I guess I'll kick it back to, is it
Yeah, we'll
Mr.
have-
Parker?
Yes,
Director.
Mr. Chair, we'll have one more slide just to summarize the reach of the strategic fund and other products and services that our office has. This is just a map to visualize the locations of different projects throughout the city. The green and red location arrows point to strategic fund projects that our office led. And you can see that they're done throughout the city. There is the only boundary that we care about is that the project is within the city. And you can see some of our partner products and services through the other colored labels as well. And so, again, we want to reiterate the point that James made, that we look for referrals from council members and other members of the city to refer businesses to our office and help us get them connected to the right services that they need. And with that, I'll pass it on to.
I have a question, actually. So is it only, is it only existing businesses, or can also potential businesses, if someone knows of someone that's trying to look to open a shop, can they also reach out to you? Is that something the office does?
Yes. Yep, we help businesses at every stage of their development, from an idea in a resident's head all the way through to a business that may exist in Wilmington and be going through difficult times, or an existing business that wants to expand, or a business from outside the city wishing to relocate.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. All right.
That concludes our slide presentation, so we're happy to take any questions.
All right. So just first off, before we kick it to my colleagues, I would like to commend you and your staff. Since the time I've been on council, you've been very responsive, and businesses in my district have been able to get a lot of help, the commercial district. I just say call up Jeff and you're there. So I appreciate it. Even new businesses looking to come in, you've been really, really good about that. So I've had no complaints, and I know the businesses in my district appreciate it on the west side, because we need a lot of help out there. And again, I appreciate the work you all do. Thank you.
No, thank you for that feedback.
All right. Now I'll kick it to, I guess we'll first, I know it's a lot of comments, so I'll first start with the members present live. If you have any questions or comments, I believe.
Yeah, thank you.
Councilman Oliver, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I would like to thank Jeff for his office for the work they've done with Jesse and James because financially, they did have some difficulty with paperwork. And you was able to walk them through that. And also the young ladies who were on Governor Prince Boulevard. I was just there yesterday, and they were very happy with the sign. But I had a question, or I just can't help from noticing, this funding here is for the strategic fund agreement, which is mostly in the 4th district. Is there a certain criteria that people were, for a strategic fund agreement that folks don't know about?
If I understand your question correctly, you're asking if there's a criteria for, so the first criteria is to be located in the city. Generally speaking, for larger businesses, we require a 10-year commitment to remain in the city, and we size the incentive based on the projected jobs and wage taxes. For smaller businesses, we have a slightly different criteria.
No,
and we
excuse
look-
me, no, I was just asking about the strategic fund agreement.
Yes, and I'm
okay,
I'm
okay.
answering.
I'm
For-
sorry,
For
okay.
strategic fund agreements for larger companies, we have a sort of a different set of requirements that I mentioned. For smaller businesses, we tend to have longer payback periods and shorter terms, because we realize that smaller businesses don't generate the number of wage taxes that larger corporations do. So that's loosely the criteria. And every business has its own separate contractual agreement that's reviewed by our law department and processed by our finance department with, you know, a unique set of terms and conditions.
That's all, thank you.
Thank you very much, Director. I believe Council Member Spadola has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I definitely echo the supportive comments from all of you, for all of you, and I've referred a handful of people. Everybody's dealt with quickly and always get good feedback, so appreciate the prompt customer service when constituents are trying to reach out. Obviously, we should support anybody when they're trying to do business in the city, and that's what you all do, so thank you. Question about the wage tax. If WITN, if you could pull up slide 5 from their presentation. So is this, the numbers on here for 2020, before it's up here, the number is just over 10 million. Is that the amount of salary subject to the wage tax?
That
Or-
is those are the wage taxes.
The
collected.
actual wage tax
Collected.
received?
Yes.
And if I remember correctly, the city wage tax, 40 million annually, approximately, is that right? How much does the city wage tax bring in annually?
As a portion of the budget, it's about,
Yeah.
about 65 million.
65 million, excuse me. Okay, 40%. That's why I was stuck on the 40 number. Okay, so what is the amount? So I could just divide this by 1.25%.
Yes.
So what is the salary? If you could do that math for me, so I don't embarrass myself. What is the?
I might embarrass myself if I try and do that math in my head, but we will get back to you
Okay.
by email with the salaries, because we track every company, every agreement, the salaries, and every year they submit their wages to us, which we then, we work with finance to validate that, and that's how we come up with the numbers. So we'll be happy to email that.
So the Office of Economic Development, again, doing quick math, you could take credit for 10 divided by 65 in terms of the amount of the overall wage tax that your office brings in, essentially.
I guess that's one way to look
Right.
at it.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a very effective tool.
And as a follow-up, I know Marshall from City Council can confer with you, but I think it would be good, and I can't speak for Council Member Spadola, but if we do have an idea what the range of salaries are they medium wage, low wage, or are they high wage earners, so we can look at how we apportion those dollars. Yes.
Are military veterans, are they able to take advantage of any of the services you offer?
Absolutely. Yes, and we don't have any special programs for military veterans, but anybody who has a small business should come speak to us. And there might be some programs unique to veterans at the state level.
Okay, but
that we
nothing
can-
in the city? Nothing special
No-
for
no,
military veterans?
No.
Has that ever been discussed?
It is not. In fact, I don't recall ever being approached with that question because, of course, we, being a smaller city, we would help. We'd love to help a veteran. We don't necessarily ask when somebody comes, but.
Okay, thank you.
And the council chair, the average
Yeah.
salary is about 80,000
Okay.
for our strategic fund companies.
So that's, I mean, I don't have the numbers, but that's above the median in the salary of the city, correct?
Well above.
Okay.
We're fortunate to have some high-performing corporations here in the city that we've used the fund to attract, as well as, blue-collar employers. So that's what drives the average up.
Excellent. All right, now I'm going to turn it to the members who are here with us virtually. But first, I have Council Member Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry. Just a couple of questions. Based on it was on the earlier, I think it was on the earlier slides when we were going through. But I just wanted to know, as far as the numbers that you had up of the different blue, yellow, and white, is there a breakdown of the average, the cost for per one that you could send us? I know you kind of gave us that, like the 1.5 million for the future commitments, and kind of gave us just a overall number. Could you break that down as far as like how much each organization or which business is getting?
Yeah. Council member, I can follow up with you after this meeting. We have those numbers in an Excel spreadsheet that I can compile in terms of our partner organizations. We've prepared the numbers for the strategic fund for this meeting, but I'll be sure to follow up with you afterwards for those numbers.
Yeah, so the, Chair, can I follow up? Sorry.
Yes, please.
And I don't know if they can put the slides back up, but there was one slide where you kind of went over those numbers in high level. So I just wanted to make sure that we can get that kind of broken down into numbers. So that, because the way yep, if you can go back, it's probably like the second or third slide. This slide, go back one. Go forward one. Yep, this one. Is there a breakdown of those agreements as far as the numbers, since we only have the totals?
We can provide that information to you.
Okay, thank you. Because I also why I say that is because it has like 2.7 million as far as the total, but for the MBEs, for example, it's only 360. So is that the average of what we typically give out for our business? I mean, for our minority businesses?
No. If I understand your question correctly, Councilwoman Dixon, I think what you're going to find is that when we're working with large companies such as Chemours that might have an $80 million payroll, and we're competing to win them into the city, as Mr. Park mentioned, we go through an analysis of the value of that wage tax stream to the city, and we size the offer accordingly so that we can put our best foot forward and win that business. So naturally, you're going to see the smaller businesses are going to have a lower total of strategic fund dollars as a proportion. When compared to companies such as Navient or Fair Square Financial or Chemours or Archer. These are firms that have 100 plus employees compared to smaller businesses that may have 2 to 3 employees. So that's sort of the calculus. If you were to divide, and we will get you those numbers, I mentioned to you this the other day, Mr. Chairman, that it's worth mentioning to your colleagues that over the years we have learned not to broadcast those numbers with the businesses at meetings. It's all public information, but it has resulted in feedback that folks whose businesses are up on the screen don't necessarily appreciate that. But again, it's all public, so we will be happy to provide that. But I think what you'll find, if you divide the smaller businesses, the number of employees into the strategic fund payments, you'll actually get a higher ratio than if you take some of the larger corporations and divide the strategic fund grants by the number of employees. That's just another way to sort of demonstrate the calculus that I described a minute ago. And probably the best thing to do is we would invite any council person to come in to our office, and we can go through our spreadsheets and share with you all the companies that we've assisted, the number of employees, the payrolls, and you can get a better sense for the ratios and the relative measurements between each company we help.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Vice Chair Harley, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If we could just stay right on that same chart. When I look at the grid to the right, it mentions total future contractual commitments. So when are you, what dates do you have in mind to meet these commitments? I do see 2 minority businesses here, Jerry Dean's and Milk and Honey. And when I looked at another chart later in your presentation, it showed that you had a balance of $52,000. Let's see, $52,000 remaining in your presently. So I guess my question to you is, again, like, when do you plan to meet these commitments? These are very small businesses, very, very small. One I know is definitely having some challenges as it relates to their business. So that's my question to you. These total future contractual commitments, when do you plan to meet them?
Sure. Of the 6 businesses up there, payments for these businesses will be made over the next 3 years. Now, the 2 smaller businesses, those will be made this year. In fact, one of those, Jerry Dean's, has already received one payment, one portion of its incentive. We're still working with Milk and Honey to finalize that agreement. But the smaller businesses receive payments up front. Larger businesses, we tend to stretch out over time. If that answers your question.
Follow up, Mr. Chair.
Yes, please.
Okay, so you basically said that Jerry Dean's, they already received one of the payments of the $25,000.
They've received a portion of that. Without going into too much detail, Councilwoman, Jerry Dean's was structured where that business received the full amount of its incentive, and it's set up so that for every year it stays in business for 5 years, $5,000 is taken off or forgiven, so to speak.
Okay, and Milk and Honey, when do they plan to receive their $25,000?
We're still working with that company, waiting for some final financials. Then we will enter into an agreement, and as of yet, we haven't finalized just how we're going to distribute that. Right. Basically, distributions are made through an agreement that's structured based on how the business needs money and the risk to the city in distributing the money over time. So we balance what the business needs versus our fiduciary responsibility to set the funds forward in a way that's at least risk to the city.
Okay, and I don't want to interrupt too much, Director Flynn, but is each deal sort of proprietary in terms of how it's structured? It's individual to that business, correct?
It is. So if
that's
some,
why we can't sit here publicly and discuss necessarily each deal, because each deal is going to be different, right?
yeah, it's all publicly available,
Uh-huh.
but each deal is different. We listen to what the business owner needs. We review their financials. We see what they have in cash. And then, if it's an air conditioning system that's gone out, you can't delay. You've got to get the money out. But if the business is well financed and they've got the resources they need, but they were worthy of a strategic fund investment, we'll structure it in a way that the funds go out a little bit every year that they're in business. Everything we do is mutually agreeable to the client. We take an approach where we're trying to help our businesses. And so, yes, Mr. Chair, every business is going to be slightly different in the structure of the agreement.
And I understand that, but since we are voting on this today, and this is all about the businesses and it's about funding, understanding how this money is going to be distributed at a high level and how these businesses are going to benefit from it now, later. I think that's just important for me anyway to know how that works, because when you read future contractual commitments, that was very general. So that's why I wanted a little more information as it related to what that meant. And I too want to thank your department, Mr. Flynn, for all the help and support that you have provided. Clearly, as we all can see, most of, or a lot, I'm not going to say most, but maybe most, but here on this chart anyway, what you're sharing today, a lot of these businesses are in the 4th District. And so I do appreciate it, and I appreciate how you're helping us to keep our economic engine moving and growing. And I believe that even it helps to attract more businesses. No business want to put their stake in the ground in an area that doesn't look like it has foot traffic or it doesn't appear to be thriving. So even from that perspective, I want to say thank you. As it relates to the 4th District and keeping our economic engine revved up and going. So thank you.
You're very welcome, and I do appreciate your questions. The answers are helpful to give everybody an understanding of how we structure each deal. It's just that every one of them really is very different within a certain sort of general framework. So
Understood.
thank you very much for your support, Councilwoman.
You're welcome.
Councilmember McCoy, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So my question is, well, basically, I do also want to commend, all that economic development has been doing, especially on the businesses that you have, brought to the city. But are we doing anything to retain businesses? That is the one question. And also, if we do lose a business, does the Office of Economic Development, they attempt to identify potential or businesses? This question is based on the loss of a grocery store in my district, and it'll be a year, I think, in February, and it was something that the office really wasn't aware of. It was something that kind of came down the pipeline really quickly. We weren't aware of. I just wanted to know, how moving forward, will we be able to make certain that we don't create a food desert within parts of the city?
Yep. Thank you, Councilwoman McCoy. Would you repeat the first part of your question?
Sorry. So it basically was, are we doing anything to retain businesses? That was the first part. And then the second part was, if we do lose a business, are we doing anything to identify like businesses to, perhaps to take their place?
Sure. We do use the fund to retain businesses quite frequently. Of course, a business has to we have to be aware of a business that is that's either making a decision to relocate out of the city, or perhaps, with the example you mentioned of the grocery store in your district, that might have a lease that's expiring, or even an existing business that's under distress. Yes, so we use these funds to do retention of businesses. Keep in mind, with regard to your example for the grocery store, there is no mechanism required by city law or regulation that a business notify the city if it's going to depart the city, change locations. There's no that a business at the end of its lease period notify the city, and there's no requirement that a landlord notify the city when a business leaves. And so and all economic development agencies are used to living with this reality. We sometimes will get intelligence from a council district person or a neighbor that a business is about to leave, or another. Frequently, it happens by an employee of the business. And sometimes there's things we can do, but other times it's a business decision that's out of the control of government. And then we do our best to work with the building owner to backfill that space. But oftentimes we have very little control over that because private property is owned by it's up to the landlord what they want to do and who they're going to lease to. But we will often use the fund as a way to compel a landlord or a business to come back into a space that's been vacated. And we did that with the example in your district of the grocery store. When we found out about that, we reached out to the owner of that small shopping center and let them know that we had funding available to help a new business enter into that space. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you. May I follow up, Chair?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. So you actually did provide most of that answer. The question is, even though you did reach out to the owner of the plaza, is there anything that the economic development can do as in identifying who may be the next person who could fill that space? The only reason why I say that is because when you're looking at something as large as a grocery store, this is not just a little mom and pops or whatever, putting something in like a corner lot or a corner home or whatever. It's definitely more expansive. So I feel like economic development would be the one to see, are you still looking for another grocer? That's the question. I want to find out, is that the type of conversation that you're having with the owners of the plaza? Can we help you identify a grocer? Are you willing to have another grocer?
Well, absolutely. That is precisely the conversation we had with that particular shopping center owner. And for example, we have that site on our list of sites available for dry goods and grocers. And I'm recalling that shortly after I was made aware of that vacation, we forwarded that to the Aldi company, which at the time was looking for additional sites in the city or in the state of Delaware.
All right, thank you very much.
Just by way of example.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Director Flynn. Moving to Councilmember Darby.
Yes, good evening. My question was to the slide with the chart. I'm not sure what slide it was, but we were just on it before Councilwoman Yolanda was speaking. Yeah, so I have a question about this chart. I know that another council person requested more information for us to understand, like numbers and whatnot. Could you also include in there for me specifically, I'm not familiar with all these businesses, but what districts they're in. And then also if they're operating still. I know you said that they're not required, but I'm hoping that if we have strategic fund agreements with certain businesses that we're tracking if they're operating or not, because for instance, like Bull Bay, the owner passed away before COVID and they haven't been operating. And I'm not sure, I can't remember if you said how old this list is, but I was just wondering based on what you're showing us, if this list is updated based on if businesses are operating or not. Unless Bull Bay up and went somewhere, I don't know, downtown or in the riverfront area, because they didn't come over this side. I'm not sure. I believe Bull Bay is like not operating at the moment. And then I do, before you answer the question, I'll have you answer the questions and then I'll follow up.
Yes, Councilwoman, you are correct. Bull Bay, unfortunately, after we made the strategic fund investment, it did close. It was very unfortunate. As you mentioned, the chef and owner passed. So let me step back and try and answer your question. The majority of our strategic fund companies are operating. With our larger clients, we have very strict clawback provisions that if they leave the city for any reason, it becomes a liability on their balance sheet. These are contingent liabilities. Larger corporations that we invest in tend to not have as much volatility. So the likelihood of them leaving or going under is less than small businesses. We all know small businesses have volatility. That's not unique to Wilmington or Delaware. So if you were to look at all of our investments over the years, you might find that the ones that have not been able to continue operations tend to be on the smaller side. And fortunately for our fund, the way we invest it is we're able to make up for that with some of the larger investments that get us to that 7-to-1 return. I think we can easily segment our businesses by district. Just keep in mind that when you're looking at investments by district, obviously there are certain districts that just have more commercial areas based on zoning than others. So each district has, Councilwoman Harley's district is going to have the largest commercial area, zoned area based as a percentage of the district. So our real estate and housing department, for example, you're going to see more activity in some of the more residential districts than economic development activity. But we'll be happy to provide that broken out by district. And I hope I answered your question.
You did, you answered it. And also, could you provide it by who is operating and not operating? Because Bull Bay isn't an operating business. So what, if you could also label which businesses are actually which ones do you actually have an agreement with? Because I don't know how you can have an agreement with Bull Bay if they're not operating. So that's what I'm trying to understand.
We have an agreement with Bull Bay that was signed in 2019, and we'll share that agreement with you. So every one of these businesses has an agreement, or it wouldn't receive the payment. And the businesses up here received payments. But it's a fair question you're asking, and I'm looking up here, and I think Bull Bay is the only one that is no longer in operation out of this list.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, if you could just add it, who's operating and not operating. May I follow up, Chair, with another question?
Yes, please.
Yeah, my question is more about funding. So, well, I'm new. So how is strategic funds funded? And then you're asking for more money on the next slide, I think it is. where does that come from? What are you like? If you can explain that whole funding piece to me, how does this work for you getting money for strategic funding?
Chief of Staff, would you like to answer the source?
The source of the funding comes from our fund balance. Does that help?
So where are we requesting money from for more money?
From our fund balance.
And I don't want.
Okay.
I'm going to still step in. We are good. That's next on the agenda, the budget amendment, where we can talk about the sources of how they plan to get find the money.
Yeah, it's actually in the fiscal impact statement. It's specified that where the money is coming from. It's fund balance tax stabilization.
Yeah.
That's where the funding's coming from.
And again, that's next on the agenda item, so I definitely will be talking about that in a few minutes. Any other follow-up questions, Councilmember Darby, right now?
No questions. I do want to say thank you to the department. I know in the summertime, Mr. Flynn, and I forgot the other person's name in the department, but they walked through the 2nd District with me in the heat. We went through North Market Street, talking to different businesses up Concord Avenue before I left for my military training. So I want to say thank you guys. And I've been referring people over. And I know you've been working with a few people over in the 2nd District. I don't think anyone on this list is in the 2nd District. So hopefully next year we can get some businesses on this list who are from the 2nd District. Thank you.
You're very welcome. We definitely appreciated that invitation, and Mr. Chair, walk-arounds are a great way for us to identify clients within districts. So we're happy to do that with any council district person.
Understood. Thank you very much for the offer. Vice Chair Harley.
I have one quick comment. Thank you, Mr. Chair. As it relates to Bull Bay, I know for a fact that the economics department worked with the previous owner because I was involved and engaged with that whole interaction. As a matter of fact, I know that the economic department actually threw them out a lifeline. I can recall during the time when 9th Street was closed off and it wasn't a lot of traffic in that particular area, there was major renovations going on in that particular area. And I know that Bull Bay was basically sinking, and the economics development department, they were able to meet with the owner at that time. And I know for a fact that they were involved in getting them some funding and actually throwing out a lifeline. So even though we had this unfortunate situation to happen, they did reach out and they were able to help them. So thank you again, Jeff, and your department. That's all I have.
Councilmember Gray, I have you next. Then
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to just reiterate what my council members have said. To Jeff and his staff, good job. I think I'm kind of familiar with your work. So my questions are a little different. Someone threw out the term clawback. What provisions are you making to require them to fulfill their contracts?
Thank you, Councilwoman Gray. The term and the wage tax level. So every agreement has a term, so the number of years the business must remain in the city, and a schedule of projected payroll. And those are the two primary default provisions. So every year we monitor the payroll and, of course, the term. And if there's a default, we work with the law department on recovery.
Are you currently, thank you, are you currently clawing back with any particular person? I don't need to really know the names, but is the office now engaged in clawing back on any properties or businesses?
At the moment, we are not.
Oh, very good. Mr. Chair, may I follow up?
Yes, please.
I may have missed this, but what are you doing to enhance minority economic development in the city? What proactively are you doing? Is it your office doing?
Sure. We're getting out and meeting with constituent groups. We're getting Mr. Williams introduced first to all of the stakeholders in the small and minority business in the industry. So, for example, Mr. Williams recently met with Danita Thomas at the state's Division of Small Business.
She used to work with you.
That's correct. And she's since been married. I apologize, I don't know her married name.
Oh, really?
For those who are watching and are saying to themselves, her last name's not Thomas any longer. But our first step, with Mr. Williams is to get him introduced to all of the directors of the agencies. So the Small Business Administration located here in Wilmington, True Access Capital, WEDCO, Small Business Development Center at Newark, et cetera, et cetera. The next step will be to get him out on a speaking tour where he's visiting your district's community groups and NPC meetings, and getting him in front of the chambers, and then quite literally walking the streets and knocking on doors. So that's our game plan, and we're just sort of at the start of it. And of course, again, whenever we get a referral, through the input from folks like you, we can respond on a one-off measure directly to that business. But
Okay, well, to go along with that, do you have any set-asides for small minority businesses?
we do. So, Mr. Chair, I know you've got an agenda here ahead of you. Would you like me to go into that?
And it's in a slide, right? It was 225, 250, and 250.
Yeah, Councilwoman Gray, so of the 1.2 million infusion, we're going to restrict 250,000 to small minority businesses.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for asking.
That's it.
And Councilwoman Oliver, I believe. last
Yes,
but not least.
yeah, I wanted to follow up. In section 11, you are asking for roughly 20% of the monies be set aside for minority business programs. Again, looking at the chart, seems like MBs are not receiving the same, small minority businesses are not receiving the same level of investments. Are you going to ensure that 20% of the funds actually hit minority businesses? Can you talk about that section of criteria? But another question was, Mr. James, will he be, I heard you say he'll be walking around. Has he started walking around to some of the businesses in town that are trying to start up businesses?
As a matter of fact, he has.
And I guess I want to specifically ask about EPEC. I think it's XPEC or whatever. I've been in that building on Orange Street, and the minority business has put in over at least $400,000, over $500,000 of his own money. And I talked to Councilman Hardy about it, and I don't know if she was going to get to it, but he is in need of some assistance. And I talked to Jeff Starkey, because the building is beautiful, but it just seemed to me, and I guess because you're new, for someone to have a business, minority business downtown, a couple of blocks away from the city, and we're always I know I'm always walking up there for lunch, different areas. It seems to me by now he should have at least maybe met with someone in economic development. Just talking to him the other day at DECO, and he said no one in economic development. And then it was to my understanding he didn't ask for any assistance, but to me, I don't understand that he never asked for assistance, but bottom line, it's a small business. He hasn't asked for any money, and it seems like someone should have. And I just think because he didn't know the process, because who wouldn't ask for some assistance from the city? So, yeah, I guess I was going to ask for the criteria.
What's the name of the business? I'm sorry.
Expec, E-P-E-C, expect.
We'll,
It's,
we'll reach
right-
out.
Okay, right next door to Linda's, on Orange Street, Linda's
Okay.
old place.
Oh, that's great, thank you.
So, and you know what, if it's any information you want to talk to me, send me offline about that section of criteria, because I know we've been going on for a while, so I'm not going to stretch it out, but I would like to hear how you're going to ensure 20% of the funds are actually going to hit some of the minorities. And are you going to be thinking about creating a benchmark in the future years,
Benchmark for,
minority businesses?
so the restricted funds that's the technique we use to make sure that we don't expend all of our strategic fund dollars on larger companies. The ratio that you're speaking to, I would be happy to talk to you offline. I see where you're headed. I think that might not achieve what you're looking to achieve, but let's talk about it when we have we can do some
Right.
math.
Sounds good.
And I'll explain my comments. But I appreciate where you're coming from with that.
Okay, thank you.
All right, final call from, actually, let me turn it to members of the public. Is there anyone in attendance, either virtually or in person, that has a question or comment for OED? All right, seeing none, I would like to turn it back to members of council for any final questions or comments. All right, well, seeing none, I appreciate OED for being present. And I know we have, next on the agenda, you may be asked some questions, so if one of you feels like staying around, please,
Happy to.
feel free.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of the Finance Committee. Excellent questions. I greatly appreciate your time and attention and your support for our strategic fund.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, let's move to the last item on the agenda. This is a legislative item, and it is an ordinance, so will need to be voted on this evening. This is ordinance 21-051. It's an ordinance to constituting amendment number 1 to the fiscal year 2022 operating budget. This is a substitute ordinance and involving some of the line items you just heard about, involving OED and some other departments in the city. I just want to do a brief opening because budget amendments aren't, they don't happen all the time. They only happen when special circumstances give rise. So we have Ms. Tanny Washington from the Mayor's Chief of Staff. We have also Mr. Greco, the Budget Director from OMB. They're here today, and they'll discuss this ordinance 21-51. An ordinance, and let me just preface it about the certain parts of it. So it's some amendments regarding Public Works, OED, and also City Council. Those are the departments that are impacted, also IT department as well. The proposed changes specifically for City Council involve some savings with WITN, which is our news station. These proposed changes are based upon WITN's station's needs as determined by the station manager, as well as some needs of the council office, which is directed by our Chief of Staff, Mr. Daniel Walker. They've discussed with council the rationale for these changes and the justification why these proposed changes are needed. On the City Council end, the budgetary, if the budget amendment passes, it will require qualified applicants to be vetted by the Personnel Committee. And also approved by resolution before any vacant positions can be filled. I just wanted to share this out of transparency in regards to council. But specifically for council's line item, there will be a approximately $45,000 savings to taxpayers through this budget amendment, which we believe will help us continue to move the city forward and make an efficient use of our staff. So that's on the City Council angle. Any questions I'm not sure if Chief of Staff Walker is there, but I can also answer the city council related questions. But otherwise,
Mr. Chair, this is Daniel. I'm on the line.
okay, you're online, perfect. All right, so that gets the city council side out. Again, it's a small change, just retitling some positions, and it's a savings to taxpayers. So with that, I will then kick it to the administration side of the budget amendment. We have Mr. Greco, Ms. Tanny Washington, and also Mr. David Sofferin, Deputy Chief of Staff as well. The floor is yours.
Chairman Johnson, I'm going to have Budget Director Rob Greco walk through the proposed changes.
Good evening, everyone. Up on the screen, can we have the summary slide that was provided?
WITN, do you need to check? Oh, okay, there we go.
Now, also, let me ask the members here, do you have hard copies of this in front of you? Because it looks, it's really, I have some
We
back
do,
here.
we do.
You do, okay.
We do.
Yeah, that's a little small to read.
Yeah, it's really small.
Okay, so what you see here is a summary of the budget amendment. This is the first amendment to the FY 2022 operating budget. So what you see is the top box, which has the gray borders. That's the original approved budget. It shows you the revenues and expenditures and the surplus or deficit before transfers. It was a deficit. The box below that with the blue border shows the results of the proposed amendments that are being requested, and then the bottom line there. So what I'll do, though, is jump to the bigger box, the pink, with the pink edge there. That has the details. Mr. Chair, you did mention some of the changes in City Council. I'll just briefly go through these. The first one is a change in the mayor's office. It's an appointed position that's vacant. It's being reclassified as the community referral specialist position. It's being changed to a best practice innovation specialist and moving up 2 grades from EO3 to EO5. That is a change to the position allocation list alone. There's no appropriation change because of savings, because of the vacancy. We don't have to increase the budget to cover the slight increase in the grade and salary. The next one is in City Council General Fund. It's the change of the title of the Legislative and Public Affairs Director to Director of Communications. Again, that's just a position allocation list change. Has no bearing on appropriations. The next one after that is we are now going to change the funding of that newly titled Director of Communications. It was 100% general fund. It's going to be split funded so that it is 65% general fund and 35% CATV fund. And if you look across that row, you'll see the savings of 39,359 in the general fund column, and conversely, there's an increase of the same amount in the CATV fund column. The next one after that is also City Council and affects, again, appropriations and the position allocation list. That's adding the new position of Legislative Policy Analyst, and that is totally in the general fund. There's no CATV funding involved with that. And then finally, again, with the position allocation list and appropriations, there's a deletion of the vacant Deputy Station Manager and the vacant Senior Producer. And in its place, we're adding 2 new producer positions. And that has a net savings of just over $48,000. And again, you see that in the CATV fund column. And then finally, Council also is reducing some MS&E items for a total of $40,000 in savings, $10,000 from consultants and $30,000 from miscellaneous projects and grants. And that is the total for City Council. So in the general fund, City Council actually will go down slightly by $1,360. The general fund will actually decrease. And the CATV fund will also decrease by $8,819, $8,819. total savings of almost $10,200 in appropriation reductions. Moving on now to the administration's request, we come to IT, Information Technologies Department. We are replacing the city's storage area network with a $1.2 million system. This has come about basically, as we've seen in Baltimore and other cities, there's been ransomware attacks where cities have no defense against these things, and they end up having to pay millions of dollars in ransom. This is to protect us against that, and this will be renewed through time. For details of this, I believe the IT director is on.
Yeah, he is.
In the meeting, but what we did here is, instead of paying for it all at once, the $1.2 million, we talked to the city treasurer. The city treasurer has a capital lease program that is capped at $10 million. We asked if there was any space in that. Most of that capital lease goes for buying police vehicles every year. We put them on the 5-year capital lease. We asked if we could put this on the lease, and he was able to accommodate us. So therefore, we will only have to increase the budget $140,000. That's the equivalent of 2 lease payments, 2 quarterly lease payments. You'll make 4 payments a year. We won't make the first payment until January, and then we'll make another one 3 months after that. So we only have to increase the budget $140,000 for this year. Now, that will continue, of course, in subsequent years for the next 5 years annually. And then finally, there's an increase in legal fees in the water sewer fund of $2 million. The largest cost component of that is the Newcastle County sewage treatment fees arbitration process. So to summarize, the general fund changes, the appropriation changes net to just over $138,000. The water fund is going up $2 million. And like I said, the CATV fund is actually going down just over $8,800. So if you look at all this, that's the budget appropriations in the operating budget. Now, we talked about the strategic fund. If you go back up to the second box with the blue border, you'll see that this is not shown as an appropriation change because it's literally just transferring money from one fund, the general fund tax stabilization reserve, into another fund, the economic development strategic fund. And that's that yellow highlighted line, the $1.2 million. That's basically a summary of the budget amendment. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to take them.
I have one.
Okay, Councilman Oliver, with your first.
Yes. I would just have, just like to, I guess, I'd just like to make a statement in reference to the IT department. I know last year, or the year before last, I know some council members were stating that they would like to see the IT department with just a regular cutter, which means cutting flyers, something as simple as, I guess, 30, 40,000, and that still hasn't occurred. We are, you know, if you have an event, you order flyers, et cetera, cards, whatever, and we are actually cutting them up ourselves because they don't have something as simple as a cutter up there. I mean, they represent the whole city of Wilmington. I thought that was just something small and simple, meeting with some of the individuals that work in that department and to see them cutting up flyers and cards, that's ridiculous. I mean, so that still hasn't happened, and now we have an amendment asking for new equipment, which I'm in favor of, but I would just like to see that department receive a cutter so they don't be cutting up flyers and cards. I mean, it's a little small,
Yeah,
but
that's a small one.
that's small.
I think we
but
can
I'm in
manage
favor
that
of it,
in the budget.
yeah, thank you.
I do have a question specifically for Public Works. I know it's litigation ongoing, and we have the Public Works Director, Williams, here. I understand that we have this ongoing litigation, but I would like to, and this is more of a question, is can we get firms that can attest to the amount they invest in diversity activities? Has that been asked of the law firm? because we live in a very diverse city, and I think we should make best efforts to have firms that are engaged, that are involved in diversity.
Oh.
Yes, Commissioner Williams.
Good evening. Kelly Williams, Commissioner of Public Works. Can you ask that again?
Just about the, I understand that there's a big transfer for legal fees
Yep.
for ongoing litigation, which I understand has been going on for a while.
Yep.
But and this may be a question for law department, they've been asked about this before budget time, but do we have a report about the firm's diversity efforts, what they do in terms of diversity, minority hiring? Because it's a lot of money, and we want firms that are into investing in diversity and getting minority and even women attorneys higher and involved in the cases. So is that a question that you've had? If you haven't had it, is it a question that you can have in the future with that firm?
Sure. We have not had it recently, but we can certainly have that conversation. Just to be clear, there's multiple litigations going on. It's not just the Newcastle County litigation. There's also an Army Corps litigation. There's a litigation with Veolia. There's a litigation with Honeywell. So there's multiple litigations involving outside law firms. But I can attest that there are women lead attorneys involved. So I promote that.
Okay. And it's a question I'm just asking because, we have that question. Sometimes it's an all-male, non-minority
Yeah.
legal team. We often see, and I want to make sure at least the team stresses diversity. So
Absolutely.
if you're having those questions, again, I know it's emergency, the funds are needed, it's ongoing litigation, but it's something I know council has stressed to us. We all stress on council the need for diversity.
Very fair
We're going to
question.
ask law department the same questions, the diversity, want firms that value diversity and investing in our city.
Absolutely. Very fair question. Yep.
All right. Councilman Spadol.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a procedural question before I get into some specific comments. So right now, we're looking at approximately 10 requests for funding, totally unrelated. And it does a disservice to me for each of the requests, and I think to the public, where it's an all or nothing slate. For example, let's say you love, Jeff Flynn's group, but you didn't want to fund the legal services, just as a bad example. I think it'd be better, and I think the taxpayer would be better served if we looked at each of these requests individually and voted on them individually, so you could really get down to the nitty gritty. So I'm just wondering, how do we all of a sudden have 10 requests to change the budget like this? And in the future, how will that be done? I'm not sure if this is administration driven.
I can't answer for the administration.
Not only do we have requests from the
That's- yeah,
administration,
it's probably
it's
legal.
also from council.
Yeah,
So we have
it
totally
is.
different departments, and we as council members are expected to vote on everything as a full slate, which I don't think is fair to any of us as a council member, or any of the department heads, or the public.
I think Chief of Staff Walker can answer, at least in regards to council procedure.
Yeah, hi, yes, this is Chief of Staff Daniel Walker. Councilman Spadola, to address your question, the process for budget amendments is pretty explicit through our charter and code. And so we do have to make sure that it is outlined in a very specific way. Now, if you want to talk about sort of the nuances of how it's presented, that's certainly something that can be discussed. But this is just sort of precedent at this juncture. And so for the way you see the changes outlined under the amendment number 1 for appropriations and position allocation list changes, it was done that way to make sure that people are seeing it at every step of the process. And so we didn't want to combine it or put some high level summary in there for at least city council position staff changes. We wanted people to be able to follow the exact happenings of council, which is why, for instance, we have the public affairs director and director of communications title change, but then in a separate line, we have the fund change as well. It's just sort of how it has to be done per our city charter and code.
And I just want to add on, Chief of Staff Walker, thank you for that. I think procedurally, again, precedent, we try to, at least I know how we've been operating Finance Committee in the 108, we try to take all the questions and answers over the past 6 months, because we're halfway through the fiscal year. So, you know, all these things come up, and then we try to get them all at once. So the idea is that we're not going to do, most likely, unless some emergency happens, we don't have to do this again until it's time to approve the next year's budget. Like last year, it was done for the body cameras. We had to do it. That was an emergency. But, you know, the idea is that we can get through the end of the fiscal year. At least that's the way I think it's been presented. But we're always open to new ideas and ways we can make this process better.
So if we wanted to change a line item on here, how would we do that?
That's a procedural law department question. I would probably have to defer to the law department. I don't know if anybody's on, but it's certain provisions of the charter we have to follow.
Okay. Could I continue?
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. Because I do have, and I've expressed this concern with you, with WITN, with the Chief of Staff. We have an opportunity right now with the 2 vacant positions at WITN to save some serious taxpayer money. I do not think there is a need for us to hire 2 new producers. We have the franchise fees have been declining year over year. They're down 20% just in the past 5 years, and we don't know what that picture will look like going forward. Regardless of the franchise fees, we are facing a structural deficit as a city, and I think it's important for us as council to get our house in order fiscally before we go to other departments and say, look, we got to do some budget cuts. And here's an opportunity where there's not a name, there's not a body, it's a vacant position, and we can save the taxpayers well over $100,000 by getting rid of these 2 new producer positions that have been vacant for some time, and WITN has been functioning fine. I should also add, WITN's predecessor in the early 90s when it was formed, their expenses were $80,000 annually. The franchise fee were $400,000. So unless we express these concerns before, unless we can get these positions out of here, and I'm happy to make a motion to